Can you hear me okay? Okay. So um, if you come tomorrow, which I hope you do, but I know people have lives, but if you come tomorrow, you're going to see this part of the talk, so you might want to come a little later because I'm going to do this part. I'm going to do this part of the talk, this particular talk again to the teachers who come, because it's important from my perspective that they get the underlying rationale for the strategic work that I'm going to ask them to do tomorrow. So much of the remainder of the day tomorrow will be on using the strategic literacy tools that are tightly coupled to science learning. So that's a forewarning that you're going to see this twice. The difference is, though, that because you are ed specialists, because you're out there supporting the teachers, what I want to tell you is that everything I'm talking about today has been work that our team of people has done with teachers collaboratively, cheek to jowl, planning and designing and professional developing in a collaborative context. So we don't, in other words, we don't just sort of go in and say, now here's what we think you should do, and here's how we think you should do it, and then they never see us again. We really work for years with the teachers on a pretty regular basis, like every 6 to 8 weeks we're in there trying to work together to figure out what we're learning about the students, what needs to be refined, and so forth. So the materials that I'll describe, the approaches I describe, are around that, and I'll tell you a little bit about, very tiny little bit at the end about a research study that we did, but mostly it's about our thinking around how we support students' access to mathematics and science. And so the problem is that in middle school and high school, as you guys know, there's a huge gap between what students can read and what they're expected to read. There's a tremendous gap. And this is most evident in non-English background communities that have non-English background speakers and communities with low reading scores. I am new to LA, but I do know that that LA has much of this challenge. And Chicago, where I spent 19 years, I did my doctoral training there and then got tenure there, worked for a long time in Chicago. These two things are representative of the majority of kids in Chicago. They are non-English background speakers and they have low reading scores. If they are English background speakers, they still have low reading scores. And so much of what we see in Chicago is that there will be schools with 800, 900 kids in them, and only 15% are reading at or above grade level. That's just very scary, and it's just not cool. It's they're likely to drop out. Their teachers are likely to be discouraged because they don't quite have the tools necessary to be able to support them. And the vast majority of Chicago kids are low income. And this work that I'm going to describe started in Chicago, and we've just started it now in LA. So for those of you who know the test, it's the reading comprehension test, the degrees of reading power. This comes from that. We call it the text fog of the underprepared. And the idea of a text fog is you got a lot of text there, and you're supposed to be making sense of it, but it's almost like it's going right through your brain. It's not clear. You can't read it and make sense of it. It's just very difficult. So we did a little sort of test with, not test in the traditional sense of it, but a check of sorts with ninth graders in one of the schools that we were working with in Chicago. It's predominantly Latino, predominantly Central American and Mexican American, with a few Dominicans and Puerto Ricans as well. And this is what on the average score was, a 39. This was the average of what our students could read in ninth grade science in terms of when they took this reading comprehension test, their average score meant that this was the kind of reading they could do. And a bird's wings are well shaped for flight. The wing is curved. It cuts the air. This helps lift the bird. So what are you seeing here? You're seeing very simple words, no complex words. You're seeing sentences that don't have much in the way of multiple clauses, not a lot of commas and all of that sort of thing. Very simple language. Probably the most complex words are shaped, curved, and forward. But then you get over here. This is what they're supposed to be able to be reading given their environmental science unit textbook, and also at the score of 66 is what a ninth grader on average in the United States should be able to read. Beginning about 75 years ago, hundreds of small dams began to be decommissioned. And of course you've got the quotation marks there. That's a signal. It's a language signal that something is important there. In the last decade, 177 dams were removed nationwide, with 26 of these in 1999 alone. So you're getting the point. You've got really much more complicated text than this. And yet, this is what they're supposed to be able to read in ninth grade. This is the level that they're supposed to be able to read. You've got words like salmon conservation, decommissioning, dilapidated, maintenance. We're setting them up for failure. We're setting them up to be discouraged. No wonder they drop out, right? No wonder they drop out. So what do? What are some of the typical curriculum curricular and instructional implications of this gap between the 39, which is the average at this particular school, and the 66, which is the national average of what ninth graders ought to be able to do? Well, people in schools, in the districts as well as in the local schools, they try to adopt or design minimally complex curricular materials. They try to find things that are as not complex as possible. They assign fewer science readings. This is the one that you probably see the most because it's the one I see the most. The teacher will work around the text. They'll just there just won't be as much text for students to read. They'll find a way to do PowerPoints. The teacher will create a PowerPoint slide or a set of notes that the students then just have to follow the notes, right? But anything to keep the kids from having to actually read. They'll do things like having the best reader in the class read. Any number of things like that. They'll try to rewrite the text, and we did this at the very beginning in terms of our work, rewriting the text to decrease the complexity, eliminating vocabulary, reducing the multi-clausal sentences, reducing and eliminating transition words like therefore, on the other hand, things like that, because those signal important concepts. The shifts have changed in the argument, and that's what's being signaled when you have transition words, and students don't know to pay attention to that. Or you can do this approach, this is the one that we've been advocating for a while now, figure out a way to make the text more manageable and accessible for students and teachers, to try to make sure that the texts don't get marginalized, that the teachers aren't working around the text, but actually see the text as an important part of the science learning, and that students learn to read and write and discuss within the language of the discipline. So it would be natural for you to ask, why all this emphasis on the reading of text and the writing of text? Because this is science after all. It's science. And I've spent my entire career working in science and mathematics. That's all I do. I do literacy in science and mathematics. I do it because I think it's absolutely critical to have non-English background students, students of color, low-income students in the STEM disciplines. And it's sort of where I've put my stake in the ground and said, I will not go over to a social studies and English, where it's safe over there. Nope. You face the hostility of science teachers who say to you, I'm not a reading teacher, what are you trying to make me do here? Why are you doing it? And you face it and you say, but trust me, this is important. So why do we try to do this? Trying to make the text more manageable and accessible. we do it because we believe that if you try to do reading support only in English language arts, and if you try to have reading time or writing time in science, it doesn't work. It'll get marginalized, it's shoved to the side. These teachers have a huge amount of work they have to do. The pacing is fast, and they especially in Chicago and now in LA as well, I'm learning. And you've got the police who come around and say, why aren't you on this page at this time? You know, the curriculum police. And so they got to figure out how to tightly couple the language work to the science work they were going to do anyway. You just make it so that the language work helps do things like formative assessment. It helps them to be able to get the kids engaged in discussion. They have to sort of believe that the science work is married to the language work anyway. It's just not the way that they've necessarily been taught to teach it to the students. So, why isn't it happening more often? Well, mostly, and we're all guilty of it, I know I am, in pre-service training classes, I didn't do enough early on with my pre-service teachers in helping them analyze curricular materials. Just simply analyzing curricular materials. So getting the textbook, which is what we do with our teachers now, you get the textbook, and you get any other materials that they've found on the web and whatever, and you say, let's start with page 1 and go to the end of the book. What are the most seminal things that the students must learn in this textbook in order to be able to know the science by the end of the year? And identify those lessons. Now let's look at the readings in the lessons. Let's look at what they have to read in each one of these seminal lessons. And then based on that, you figure out how to work with those materials. And I'll talk more about it later. But little to no pre-service training and just simply analyzing the materials. Analyzing before they go and teach them. Analyzing the charts and graphs and tables. Analyzing summative and formative assessments. Really thinking about, given that I have students who likely are non-English background learners and or who have poor literacy skills, what do I know about these materials? Where can I see the challenges that the students are going to face ahead of time? How do I anticipate them? They have little time to plan to change, and the professional development that they do get, you know, that may be QAR, it may be, you know, a million different strategies. I've talked with teachers and they say, well, you know, I try to do all the strategies, but it just gets in the way because I have so much. I only have so much time to plan and do the teaching of science. You know, they'll have a toolkit of like 40 strategies. I mean, it's just crazy. And you're saying to them, how could you ever learn how to do any of them very well? You don't have time, and you're trying to remember all these strategies, and you don't necessarily have a rationale for when you would apply any strategy to that particular lesson. What's the goal of the lesson? How do you know that that particular literacy strategy actually works? So, which one should they use? When? How should they use it? Why? Which is most critical. What's the underlying rationale for when to use a particular strategy? And for which students are the strategies effective? And how do you seamlessly, tightly couple them to the science? So, our work has been to try to leverage people, materials, and tools to try to help students become more skillful readers and writers and communicators. Our aims have been to increase subject area achievement by increasing students' reading comprehension. And you see here that this comes after this. The goal is to increase the science. The mechanism is through increasing comprehension, not the other way around. Making text more prominent and giving students opportunities to be active with the text, because we really believe that activity with the text, acting on the text, is what's critical, and not being passively sort of sitting and reading. And we try to design and build social practices, routines in the environment that help support the middle and high school content area classrooms.
But
By making text more prominent, when I said that the teachers have to think about what the seminal texts are for the entire year, what are those important things, the goal then is to have the text, after they've identified that this is an important text, to actually have the students read the text, talk about the text, analyze the text, do something with it, as opposed to do that reading for homework. That text is not prominent. It's a very different sort of relationship to text. So we talk in terms of problems of practice, the use of text in science learning. So one problem of practice is that, as I said before, teachers don't necessarily know how to use text in science learning because they haven't thought about the role of the text in the science learning. They're thinking about the content. And I know that the content comes through the text, but they're thinking about the content of the science phenomena, the science processes, as opposed to the materials that are the source of the information. And that's different. You guys following me on that one? So they aren't necessarily been taught to support knowledge acquisition in the content, to support the core concepts and disciplinary procedures. Okay. Why did that happen? Okay. Well, let me see. Purpose for visit. Presenter? Okay. All right, and I'll click. There we go. One of the things my father told me many years ago was life is a series of adjustments. And those have been some of the most amazing words for me over the years. And so little opportunity to reflect about how text supports their own disciplinary learning. One of the things that we do following work that Cindy Greenleaf has done is over the years we've asked science teachers to just think about how they learned the science. How did they learn science? It might have been through lecture, it might have been through books and textbooks and so forth, but it also is the case that they might have made notes in the margins of their materials, and they might have analyzed the charts and graphs and so forth. How did they learn the science? What did they do to learn the science? And then, again, little opportunity to reflect about how text supported their own learning. So we've been making an argument for a while that teachers need specific techniques to couple what they understand about science to literacy tasks. Another problem of practice is that there need to be routines. Remember I was saying earlier that if teachers have one strategic literacy approach, they've got like 20, some literacy strategy. There need to be routines that are coupled to the strategy. And, so they need to build a capacity in knowing when and how a text should be presented to support content. For example, if the text introduces a concept, remember these seminal texts again, that if the students do not know this content, they are really not going to learn what they need to learn through the school year. So thinking about those texts that are seminal, does the text introduce the content? And so maybe should that be the first lesson, even if the publisher has it coming later in the chapter? If there's really some, there's some sort of stuff at the beginning of that chapter, but then the real meat of it, the seminal piece, might be in the middle. It's not necessarily the case that what's at the very beginning of a chapter is the thing that's most critical for students to learn. It could be in the middle, it could be in the first third. And so really analyzing those materials and saying, well, what if the text introduces it, should it be in the first lesson? If the text reinforces or summarizes a concept, maybe it should come later. If it describes procedures, where should it be introduced in the lesson? If it has many new disciplinary words or phrases, how should it be taught? How much of the text needs to be read? Maybe even though a piece of text, like I've worked with BSCS a lot, the one with is it the person on the front? Anyway, the BSCS biology textbook, I've worked with that a lot, and there are lots and lots of reading, lots of essays, and so forth. And so you sort of ask yourself, do the students really need to read all 3 pages of the essay? Could we chunk it instead? Are there other ways for students to get the information? Can they get it from the first 2 or 3 paragraphs, or maybe they only need certain paragraphs in the text? So the goal here, to be really clear, is that we've been making an argument that for teachers to be able to make use of the supports for the language of science, they absolutely must take a meta perspective on their own disciplinary knowledge and the materials they use. They absolutely have to say, let me look at the text in my materials. What is the role of the text in my materials? Is it to introduce? Is it to reinforce? Is it to describe procedures? Is there a particular thing that they're reading that has lots of disciplinary words and phrases? And this is particularly critical because teachers will also pull things off of the web. They'll see some exciting new lesson or some activity and they're like, yes, this is exactly what I was looking for. But they need to analyze it this way, or certainly have some of these things in mind, because it's not just the content in the text, it's how the content is presented. What's the structure of that content, and what's the role of that content? And having that awareness is good for both the teachers and for her colleagues or his colleagues to think about the role of the text that the students are being asked to read. So our analytic approach, as I was saying just a minute ago, is to really think about what type of science text it is, what role does the text play in the instruction, and this is again the same sort of thing. Does it deliver a particular kind of context? Does it have a procedure or process? Are there formulas or guidelines or structures of inquiry in that text? What's going on in that piece of text that the students are being asked to read? We also say that by and large, at least for the beginning of the year, until students have gotten really good at working with text, that you don't want to send it home as homework. They're probably not going to read it, and if they do read it, they're not going to read it well. And, you know, the classroom should be the place to tackle the text, because that's also where the content is. It's both content and structural features, learning to language the text. So another analytic approach that we use, and these aren't separate, these are all part of the same work, is thinking about formative assessment questions. So you know how at the end of every chapter in most textbooks, even the National Science Foundation funded textbooks, there are questions at the end of the lesson, and most books will have this. And so we spend a lot of time working with teachers on what's the role of the questions. What's the role of the questions? Again, it's not just about the content that the question is asking, but what is the question supposed to do? What is that question supposed to do? Is it asking fact-based information? Is it just trying to figure out whether the students learned some fact in that particular chapter? Is it analyzing? Is it asking for students to analyze something, to synthesize information, maybe recalling something that was in the previous chapter? Is it asking them to draw conclusions? Do they have to create some chart or graph or timeline that shows evidence of their understanding? Are they being asked to do inference or analysis, inference and synthesizing? Are they just asking for a definition? Is that particular question asking for a definition? A procedure, the student has to describe some process. A student has to make a prediction, provide a summary, making connections. What's the role of the questions? And often, when I talk with teachers, they will say this is the first time that they've thought about the role of the questions at the end of the chapter. They think about, does this question, maybe they'll either assign the questions as sort of whole cloth or ask them, just do the first 3 questions or whatever. But they haven't been taught, again, because we don't do a good enough job of doing this, they haven't been taught to think about what the question's actually asking the students to do. What's the role of the question? What does it do in terms of science learning? Because these are the things: analysis, synthesis, drawing conclusions, being able to show evidence of understanding, often through creating some graph or timeline, inferencing, prediction. This is science. This is what scientists do, and this is what we're supposed to be teaching students to do. It's not like this is some language arts activity. This is science. Understanding how to describe a procedure, being able to make an analysis and synthesis, to draw some conclusions, being able to make connections, being able to engage in inferences. That's the work of scientists. That's the work of science education. And using things like the assessment questions to point out for teachers that paying attention to what they want to make sure students know by paying attention to the assessment questions and the role is an important component of this. So analytically, we also talk to the teacher about lesson goals. You're getting the point here that we spend a lot of time talking to teachers over a long period of time. It really is the case that relationships have to be developed over a long period of time, because it's really about taking a new look, a different look at the materials and at the teaching, and thinking about what that means for students. So analytically, looking at lesson goals. So what are the teacher's goals for that lesson? Again, going back to, is the teacher trying to introduce a core concept? Is it content vocabulary, learning about a procedure, learning an important event, making connections? And then how does the teacher usually implement the lesson? If the lesson has something to be read, does the teacher just avoid it? Is it heavily scaffolded? Is a lot of hand-holding, the detailed PowerPoints, and students are just supposed to take notes on those PowerPoints? Is the teacher using KWLs or QAR? Are there routines, like, an exit slip or quick write or something like that, that is the way that the teacher knows what the students learned? What's happening? What's the teacher's goals, and how does the teacher carry it out? So about 10 years ago now, maybe more, when we started doing this work, we decided that we were going to focus on 3 strategic literacy tools. That's it. 3. 3 we figured was about as much as people could really comfortably get good at. When you start getting into 5 and 10 and so forth, it's a lot. It's a lot. And if you're not a reading teacher, if you're a science teacher, you don't have time to try to learn a bunch of different ones. So we focused on 3. Annotation, which really is a kind of recognition tool. It clues students that there are elements in text that support comprehension. Double entry journaling, which you guys are probably very familiar with, which highlights for learners what they understood from the text. And then summarization, which analyzes the text, and you get a sense of what students really critically understood from the text. Can they capture the gist of it? Summarization is probably the hardest of the 3 of these, and the thing that's always interesting to me is that when we have done this work, the science teachers are best at summarization. The English language arts teachers are the worst, and they get really annoyed by that, because in their minds, summarization is a kind of low-level skill, that other kinds of skills in literature are much more important. But in our minds, if you can capture the gist of something, if you can represent that gist in science, that's pretty powerful, because science is a complicated subject. It has a lot of moving parts, and being able to capture the gist is critical. So what we do in terms of a routine, and my student and I wrote this a while back, and it's sort of useful in thinking about how to carry out the routine. The teacher, to introduce it, explains the role of the tool, then describes the specifics of it. This is what the tool is supposed to do. Annotation is supposed to help you be able to see the structures in text. And describing exactly what the annotation is, we often will have posters up on the walls so that students, and I'll show you that, students can look on the walls and see what the annotations are supposed to be. We will tell the students, or the teacher will tell the students, that doing this annotation is going to help the student when it's time to answer the questions at the end of the chapter and at the end of the semester. Now, that gets students' attention, right? Because if they know that by paying attention to the stuff they're reading and marking up the text, they are going to have the information they need to be able to answer the questions at the end of the semester and certainly at the end of the chapter, that's big. Because they're looking for tools. They want help. They want something to hang these ideas on. Then guiding the students one paragraph at a time, showing them what annotation looks like, reviewing the results as a group, and then discussing the reading. So given that you've annotated this text, and interestingly, when students have to actually annotate a text, there's no real magic. I mean, they're drawing and circling and so forth. The magic is that they actually slowed down and paid attention to the reading. That's really what it is. This is not rocket science. It's just, they just slowed down and read the material. Because as you know, most of the time what will happen is the students will be told to read the material. The good ones, you know, that is the ones who are the really good readers, not good children necessarily, but good readers, they will read the material, and the rest of them will look over it, see that it's too hard, or they don't feel like being bothered because they haven't had a lot of success with reading in the past, and they'll sit back and they'll wait for the teacher to explain what the content is about. Or they'll wait for the teacher to call on one of those good readers to explain. And that's what they do. And they have skated by for years and years with that strategy. It's not a great strategy. They're not going to make A's like that, but it's a decent enough strategy to get you through, right? So discussing the reading is critical because after the students have read this, they've slowed down, they've read, they've marked, they've had to do this, they actually will find, and we have interviews with kids who will say, I actually knew what the reading was about. Because I could participate in the conversation. I could talk about it. That was so cool. Yeah, they use words like sweet, you know. I mean, they get excited because they can actually participate. It's not just the good kids, the ones who had the good reading skills. They all can participate. Why? Because they actually read it. They marked it up. Again, it's not rocket science. It's just, you know, you got to be able to read it to be able to engage in the discussion. So this is what an example of an annotation. I know it looks like a mess, but so the idea is the students will put a triangle around the vocabulary words. They'll underline the argument, depending. It could be a reading that has a main idea and supporting idea, or it could be a reading that has an argument and evidence. And that completely depends on the author. So in any textbook, you may find that because it was written by multiple people, some of the people will write the text and the readings and so forth with an argument and an evidence offered. Others don't. If you really look at it and read it, there's no argument being made and there's no evidence being offered. It's just kind of this overview. You get a main idea and you get some supporting ideas, but you really don't get argument and evidence. And so part of the job is to try to figure out, well, given that text, the teacher's task ahead of time is to say, is there argument and evidence being made? Are there claims and evidence being made here in this text? Or is it just sort of a basic, straightforward main idea, supporting idea? They have to circle the headings. They do things like they asterisk transition words, on the other hand, by contrast to, because a shift is being made in that content, right? And because everyone in this room is very well educated, we can read this stuff and we say, oh, on the other hand, by contrast, in spite of, we know an argument is shifting. The author has just made some change in the discussion. And that change in the discussion is critical for understanding the remainder of that text. Do kids know this? Mostly not. They don't know how to read in that way. They haven't been taught to identify those important words that are critical for understanding the author's argument about the science. So these are the kinds of posters that go on walls, and we have them for mathematics, for various forms of science. So circling the headings, rectangle the science vocabulary words, triangle, other kinds of vocabulary words that are present. And those are often words that may not be part of the reading, that is the specific reading, but are still words that the students know as some word that they're supposed to know that they don't really know it yet. And it's a good way for teachers to see what students understand and don't. Labeling definitions. So actually, you know how in a text something will be written, it'll say, and the transition, comma, and then it'll say, this means a shift or change or something. If you're lucky, it'll say this means, or it could just say a shift or change, right? That's a definition. It's an embedded definition. So when students read something and they'll say, well, I don't understand what that word meant, or I don't understand the argument, what they're saying is they didn't see when a definition was present. They didn't know how to pick it out. They don't know. And so teaching them that in many cases, if it's a decent text, there's a definition there. Double underlining main ideas and supporting ideas, or again, claims and evidence, depending on how it was written. Labeling conclusions, understanding that at the end of a reading, there is a concluding paragraph or a concluding sentence, they should pay attention to that because that's part of the science. And for biology, chemistry, and physics, we also do things like paying attention to procedure words, because there are a lot of procedure words that are in particularly those disciplines. And paying attention to those, recognizing that that's a procedure word, it's telling you either that something has been done or to do something, is critical. And again, with formulas or equations, it's very empowering for students just to be able to sort of say, okay, I'm putting my equal sign here. There is a formula, and I'm going to have to pay attention to that formula later. It has some value for what I'm supposed to be learning. And then double entry journals, which I think are the most amazing thing that was ever invented in life with respect to learning, because you can do so much with them. So a double entry journal, you could have a main idea and supporting ideas. And this is an actual example from a student in 9th grade's work. Or you could have here the vocabulary word and what I think it means. Or you can have here the formula and my understanding of the formula in words. Or you can have here the examples of something that the student found really interesting in the text and wants to know more about, and what the student thinks it is. I mean, it's just the most amazing tool in the world, because you can just do so much with it, and you can do a quick glance through to see what it is students understood. And then we've been using a tool called Summary Street, which the company was Knowledge Analysis Technologies, and then it got bought by Pearson. But the idea was to have students write their summaries of a particular thing that they read, like here, the healing power of maggots. And what Summary Street has is a corpus of thousands and thousands of materials, mostly expository text, mostly in science, about any number of science topics. And so when the students do their summary about the particular topic they just wrote, the Summary Street does a kind of semantic analysis, and it measures that summary against that big corpus of data they have of text about that same topic. And it's been shown to be as reliable as with, I think, 90% accuracy, as what teachers would grade the text. So, and depending on the topic, even more. So we use DEJs, as I said, I love DEJs. We use them a lot for classroom assessment. So things like identifying a key reading that's in that chapter, one of those seminal readings. Let's say, the nature of liquids. Then the teacher and the coach, because we often, whenever we have money from a foundation or a government, we hire a coach to be in there doing day-to-day professional development with the teachers over the course of at least a year. So the teacher and the coach then create a DEJ that's very tightly coupled to what the students were going to have to read anyway. So let's say that the DEJ asks students to use information to explain the scenarios that were in the nature of liquids. Then the teacher will use the DEJ as a formative assessment, looking over students' work, looking over the application scenarios in the DEJ, and that told the teacher whether or not the instructional moves that he'd planned to make were the correct ones, and perhaps a shift needed to occur to make the instructional moves more applicable given this formative assessment, understanding what students knew and didn't know. The reading support tools can be used individually or in combination. So we've had teachers begin by asking students to annotate the chapter text. Then later in the class period, they'll complete a vocabulary double entry journal, and then they'll refer to those tools when completing the textbook chapter questions. Or the teacher may say, do an argument and evidence DEJ, and then the students, based on that argument and evidence DEJ, will then go home and write a draft summary for homework. And then maybe they'll revise the summary using Summary Street the next day. So this is something that took us a long time to create. It took us a lot of years to really understand teacher thinking and teacher moves around the work. But so we'll ask again, and I know I keep going back to it, but this is the sort of the fundamental, it's sort of the foundation. Where is the content? If you're thinking about the materials, is the content in the vocabulary? Is the content the main ideas? Is the content presented in a story format? Is the content very inferential or some other thing? So if it's the content that the teacher's teaching that day, if it's mainly vocabulary, the reading that the students have to do, does it give definitions? Okay, well if it does, then the kids can probably do annotations. If it doesn't, on the other hand, will students have any prior knowledge? Will they have any way to associate those vocabulary words? Yes, well, then they can do a DEJ vocabulary. This is the word, and this is what I think it means. On the other hand, let's say if the students are doing a the text is in main ideas. So then you ask, well, is the article broken into sections clearly? Or is there one central topic? If yes, well, then the kids can just do a summary. But if not, then we need to maybe ask students to put the ideas in their own words and then do a DEJ on it. So these are all the kinds of things that teachers would take a meta perspective on in science. And then moving from there, these are the kinds of decisions instructionally the teacher might make in order to be able to tightly couple the science that the kids are supposed to be learning to the literacy tools and routines. And then we do ongoing PD sessions, monitoring, reflection with the teachers, co-creating peer review assessments, refining the curricular support materials, lots and lots and lots of feedback, monitoring pacing guides. What we found is when teachers do this work, they're in a panic right around November because they are way behind on the pacing guide. And they're sort of saying, I'm not sure, yeah, the kids are learning this, but I'm about to be in trouble because it's, And then somewhere around the end of January, when the test scores come back in from the end of semester assessments and they realize that their students learned so much more than their colleagues whose students didn't do this, and the students now don't need as much hand holding, then the teachers are just sort of like, oh, this is great. And this is what happens in the first year. The second year, when the teachers are really comfortable with the routines and the tools, the kids basically are in good shape by November. And it sort of goes from there because the teacher understands how to support the tools and routines. But the one important thing to say is that by the end of the school year, the kids who have done this sort of work have caught up and in many cases surpassed in terms of the amount of lessons that were able to be covered than the kids who weren't in the classes that did this. And the reason is because the kids are actually, they don't have to be retaught so much, you don't have to keep going over the same material because the kids are reading the material. They're actually paying attention. So it makes life a lot easier for the teacher in the long run. So just really quickly, here's an example of some work we did at a school on a collar community right outside of Chicago. And this was supporting literacy in the high school science classroom program. So very diverse. It's a very ethnically segregated community of roughly about 150,000 people. And you can see here 46% white, 34% black, 13% Latino, 4% Asian, 3% multiracial or biracial kids, a pretty high low income level, and on the Explore test, 40 to 50% of these kids, the black and Latino kids, were scoring below the national norm. So we were asking in our research, does proficiency with the reading support tools and social practices, that is the routines, is that related to science achievement? And so basically what we wanted to know is if students could show that they could use the literacy support tools well and do the routines associated with it, would that make a difference in terms of their science achievement? And we also wanted to know if it would make a difference if proficiency with the reading tools predict science achievement over and above their incoming reading scores, and could the results inform the refinement of science-specific reading supports. And so what we did was we started off in the fall of 2007 with the PIs on the project and the PLCs. I don't know if do you have PLCs here in Texas? It's the teacher meeting groups, a select group of them, and then the literacy science coach. And so we started with the biology teachers. We had 5 teachers. We worked piloting these literacy supports in the science classrooms with them. And then we did PD with the teachers every 2 months. Then by the spring, we were continuing to work with the biology teachers, and we were now watching how they implemented the genetics unit that had the literacy supports, still with coaching support. Then in the summertime, we worked with them some more and created model lessons with them that they would be implementing during the school year. And then by the fall, the 5 teachers who had done all this work now did a presentation to the 14 science teachers who were all in the 9th grade science program department. And so that encompassed the anatomy, the environmental, and the honors AP science teachers. Then we continued to have the teachers work with the coaching, and we started in the fall. Now that biology was sort of launched and we were continuing to watch them, we started in the fall with the chemistry teachers and began the process again. At the end of the fall semester, we did a pre-assessment with the students to see where they were. So the assessment process, basically we did a quasi-experimental where we did pre and post design. In January and then again in June, we did a 1-day assessment of the students' ability to use these strategic tools and to try to understand their science achievement with 860 kids. We wanted to know how well they could use the tools and what that would mean in terms of their science achievement. And the assessment was the same in January and June, but the students who got 1 reading in January got the different reading, the opposite reading in June. We analyzed the reading difficulty. We altered the text to make sure they were comparable. There were 10 multiple choice questions, and then we piloted them on the chemistry kids who had had biology the year before, just to try to see how they would do, just answering the questions. So the kids had to read the text, either annotate, summarize, or do a DEJ, and then they had to answer 10 multiple choice questions. And so this is what the text looked like. This one, dangers to the coral reefs, and here's an example. There were 10 questions. Here's an example of one of them. And they were, depending on what they were told to do, they could either annotate the text, or they were supposed to summarize it, or they were supposed to create a double entry journal of that text. And here's another example of one of the readings. So the results, what about these relationships between reading achievement and science achievement, tool use and science achievement, the value of the tools? What we found was that reading achievement, as determined by the national percentiles, was strongly correlated with science achievement based on these multiple choice items. It strongly predicted students' proficiency with tool use. That is, if the students' reading achievement was also very predictive of whether the students were proficient in using the summary, annotation, double entry journal. And the use of the summary, annotation, and double entry journal was moderately correlated with science achievement over and above their on-entry test score, their on-entry reading scores. Annotation was less consistent. We're not sure why exactly. We don't think we understand how to measure it well yet. But we do know that the use of the literacy tools allowed teachers to improve science learning regardless of on-entry level. So kids who came in with poor literacy skills were able to improve their science learning, and just like the kids who came in with stronger literacy skills. And the kids who had the lowest literacy skills did better than everyone else in terms of gains, just actual gains in performance. So, trying the tools on for size, that's for tomorrow, so we will ignore that for now. So, so anyway, that's the work, and so I'm just sort of happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Which one did they use the most in the annotation, the double entry journey, or the summary?
The teachers really liked the double entry journal the most. Many of them found they used summary the least. Many of them found that if they used annotation paired with double entry journaling, they got more bang for their buck because the students are slowing down enough to read the text. And the teachers, rather than having the teachers read the text to them or something like that, if they would have the kids do the annotation, then do the double entry journal, they got the best bang. But if they didn't want to do that or have time to do that, doing the double entry journal was very effective.
And then when the students did the questioning on their own, which ones did they use?
On the test, the June and Jan, they were each assigned one. So,
so they had to use one.
They had to use one or the other.
Choose.
No. We thought about having them choose, and I think for the next study we're going to have them choose because I'm really curious to see which one they will rely on the most. Yeah.
When
yes.
they were analyzing the content, did they use their the state standards for their goals or their guide? Is that what they used for their content?
We did not use the state standards at that time, and the core standards weren't out then. The state standards for they did use the state standards for science. They didn't use the state standards for reading. They did pay attention to that, and that was part of what helped inform whether and what the particular goal of that reading was. But of course, the state standard isn't tied to the reading itself. It's just saying that students are supposed to cover those kinds of things like learning how to recognize argument and evidence and so forth. Yeah. And yes.
The science teachers are held accountable for science scores per se. After utilizing those tools in the classrooms, was there any improvement as far as test scores in relation to learning those overall?
Yes.
You mentioned that at all, and I'm just curious where you stand because a lot of the districts here, we have the same type of students. We have student apathy is the biggest problem. And I'm just curious whether, yes, you're going to improve the reading comprehension or the reading levels in the students, where it helps them overall in all courses, I understand. But the science scores themselves are the ones that are going to be used to judge the teachers. I'm just curious how.
Our students performed better than their peers at the comparable school. They performed better than their peers both in reading achievement and in science achievement.
Were there scores percentage-wise or anything? I'm just curious how much.
I can't tell you for sure because I don't have that information here with me, but I can send you the information. But I do know that they scored significantly better, by statistical significance, better than their peers did. Yes?
You mentioned you do math and science.
I do.
And this is purely science. Do you do anything like this for math?
Yes, I do actually.
Do they analyze the text? Yes?
I have just started working with, we did some work with math teachers back in Chicago, and we had, these were math teachers of 7th grade students, and they also analyzed the text. And just recently working with teachers of developmental mathematics students at community college. I've begun doing that work, and we've been doing the same thing as analyzing the text and trying to figure out how to make the text more accessible. Also thinking about what would talk look like, what would instruction and routines look like in the classroom that would actually make model for students what it means to language science, and to offer a full and complete explanation for your understanding. So we've begun to do that work, yeah.
It seems like there would be, because of the testing now in mathematics,
Mhm.
the way it's, the application, that teachers have almost had to start doing some kind of this in math classes, right? Because if they were just teaching the old way with the new tests, I know even like in elementary school with the word problems, just having to be able to read the questions and know the terminology and the vocabulary to understand what the question is asking. It seems like maybe math might be a little bit ahead of the science because they've almost had to start teaching that, right?
I think they're primed to do it. I haven't seen much evidence that it's happening yet, and I think mostly because they're not having enough opportunities to sit and think about how to do it. It's happening in a silo. You're doing it, and you're doing it, and you're doing it, and there's not a lot of conversation about what am I going to do, why am I going to do it this way, and what is my evidence that this is, what am I looking for to show that it's actually working. Again, in pre-service programs, we need to do a better job of sort of saying to teachers, to pre-service teachers, what are the kinds of explanations you're looking for, and how will you know that the students got this particular piece of information? When students are using charts and graphs and tables, what's your evidence that the students really understand this? Thinking about that and being explicit about it, because they know what they're looking for internally, but I think that much of the professional development and much of what's the pressure that's on math teachers as well as science teachers now is, you ought to do this, but we're not really telling you in any meta analytic way how to do it. And that's I think a wide open area of work.
This is high school, right?
I usually work from 6th grade through 12th grade.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because do you think like the big push like 10 years ago for all the classes that we took about teaching reading in the content areas, is that not?
That's exactly what I was saying about the 40 strategies.
Okay.
Yeah. So because
maybe not overwhelming then.
Well, yeah. I mean,
feeling like, oh, I can't do that.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of, if you think about that big push over the last 10 years, teachers would go to several, at least 1 or 2 professional development sessions per year. It was disconnected from whatever it was they were going to be teaching, and it was the, kind of the strategy flavors of the month kind of thing.
Right,
and
very general.
very general, and rather than bring your materials in, let's learn a couple of strategies really well, the rationale for how to do them, why to do them, when to do them, and then think about where you're going to couple those to your lesson. If you have 10 lessons in that chapter or 5 lessons in that chapter, where are they going to be coupled, and why might you do this particular one, and what are you looking for? How is it going to serve your larger goals? We don't do that. Not as a field in terms of working with math and science teachers. We don't do that like we should.
Right.
And so they're left
Where
just
do
confused.
the literacy coaches come from? Is that a position that the schools?
Well, it's interesting. The coach actually was a former science teacher who had worked with us over several years, and who became the science coach who knew how to support literacy. And that helps a lot, because the literacy coaches, unless they really have been trained in what it means to support literacy in math and science, will by and large encourage a kind of, it's reading time and now it's science time. Or we'll work on grammar or something like that. I think it really has to be someone who really buys into the idea of the science first or math first and the literacy as a tool to support it, as opposed to reading in mathematics or reading in science. And anyway, but to answer your question, we had some money, and so we were able to pay half of this person's position, and we convinced the school district to pay the other half. And the person had the position for 3.5 years until or 3-4 years until the superintendent changed. And then, of course, it always happens. Yeah.
Did you get to work with the team planning effort? And what was the reaction of the kind of work that you were doing?
The five teachers we started off with in this particular school, I mean, we've worked with different teacher groups, but the 5 teachers in this particular school were predisposed because they were really worried about the low-level scores of the students. The 14 or 15 that we expanded to, they looked like deer caught in headlights. I mean, they were just like, what are you doing? But we had the credibility and the buy-in of those 5, and then we had this science teacher coach who was working with them. And so within a couple of months, they were much more predisposed to be in favor of it and really worked well with us on it. But at first it was, I'm not a reading teacher, and I've got stuff to do. I'm on I have a pacing guide, and how do I know that this isn't just another flavor of the month? And so it took time, and you can't be annoyed by that, right? You've got to work with them because they've seen so many things come and go. Why is this any different?
Right. But in the end, do you think they saw the value or that they appreciated it?
I really do. The interviews we have with them, the surveys we have with them, say to us that, and they were frank about things they didn't like too, but it says to us that they were so excited that their students were actually reading the material. That's sort of, it seems so simple, right? But just having the students read the material so that students could engage in the conversation and the discussion, because nobody likes it when, no teacher likes you keep talking to the same 3 people and the rest of the class is either looking bored or heads are on the desk and they're looking sad, and you don't like that. So, yeah.
Did you ever go back to, they changed superintendents, did you?
We still actually are friends with many of these teachers. Some of them are my Facebook friends even.
So they didn't take it away from them?
They took away the coach. The teachers, many of them are still trying to continue to do the work. But, they're getting pressure to do other things as well, as often happens. That's the heartbreaking thing about working with schools. Yeah, I think oh, yes.
Well, I'm excited about, the kids actually getting to start reading, but I'm really more excited about the teachers being able to analyze what it is they're supposed to teach. So many of them sit back and say, just tell me what to teach.
Yeah.
So they revert to these expensive things like C-scope and so forth. And these textbooks are there and they get thicker and thicker, and so ultimately they just kind of put them aside, and so
That's exactly
they
right.
don't do this, and ultimately the kids won't be doing it either. So it's just a shame. So I can really see this analysis. And yes, they work in teams and so forth, but in teams, they don't actually do the work. They're kind of like, okay, here's what it is, and who's going to do what. And that's what has happened. I see this in our mentees sometimes. They leave the campus with all these strategies, things that they want to do and so forth, but they go back and, no, you have to teach it this way from this particular formula.
We found that I do know that looking at the materials differently was an important outcome. I do know that the teachers felt more powerful, and they would say things like that. Actually looking at their materials and analyzing them, not only thinking about the content, that is, oh, this reading is about photosynthesis and this reading is about whatever, but actually saying, give, with this reading, what is it going to do for me in terms of instruction, and what are the kids supposed to learn from it? What particular thing? Is it a process? Is it, is it definitional, that, just sort of introductory or whatever? It's treating teachers like professionals, it's saying, here's the materials you're in charge of teaching. Take an analytic perspective on your materials. It's saying you have an analytic perspective to take. You've been trained. Let's do that. I think that's really important for teachers, because so often they're, it's kind of like you're trying to teacher-proofing everything, and that's insulting. And they've been trained. They're college educated. They have some skills. They should be encouraged to take their skills out for a spin. Yes, I think you had your. Did you have your hand up?
No.
Oh, okay.
I have another question.
Yeah.
How did you identify the time for working with your teachers?
We did a couple of things. We got the district to agree that that the time that they would have for PLC, for example, could be given over once a month to this planning work. At first it was every 2 weeks, and then once a month. So a lot of it was sort of convincing the district that this was an important and worthwhile thing to do. So we did that. In the summertime, we got the district to agree that the teachers could do this work, and we paid at first the teachers their hourly rate to do the work, and after a while the district would kick in some portion of it, but that's a kind of, we said this is professional development, and just like, in fact I think we got them exempted from some goofy professional development that they would have been asked to do,
I think that's very important, and I ask that question because I feel that in my experience many times the novice goes out, and when just like we talked about yesterday, when they go out and they encounter this whole different thing, they've done things like planned a lesson, and they've done their student teaching, but this whole new thing where it's all my responsibility is totally new to them. And planning at the level that they now have to plan, I think, is exactly what you said. They don't have time to really get analytical with it, and then they don't have any guidance many times. And so I think the pressure to revert that we heard Rose talking about sometimes comes from just trying to survive and do what they think everybody else is doing. And so, and I think a part of it is fear, and so that fear factor keeps them, I think, from thinking at a higher level, and therefore doing some of the things that you were talking about.
I think you're absolutely right, and again, I think we just made a strong case to the district that you know how teachers are supposed to have professional development. They have this week, kind of cleanup week at the end of the school year. They have a week before school starts, and then of course these PLCs. We just made a strong case to the district that this was professional development that was going to be directly linked to the classroom content, and that if they would just trust us, they would see good results. And so they gave us the blessing of saying, okay, we will exempt these teachers from having to do whatever the professional development was going to be, was somebody coming in from somewhere that didn't.
Disconnected.
Yeah, totally disconnected. And we just said, trust us, let us do this, and they did, and we got good results. But I think that it's really asking for an exemption, because you need to be able to leverage all of these opportunities, because teachers, many of them have second jobs, and they have to go to work, and they don't have time to stay after school.
So what do you say, or what will you say tomorrow when teachers' number one thing is, we can't do this, we have to, like what you said, the curriculum police, we have to stay on this is what works, and if you really believe in it, then somehow you'll figure out how to do it.
I don't think they can do it alone. I mean, I really don't. I think what I will say to them is that they need to leverage their educational specialists to actually begin creating small collaborative work groups to do this. I just don't think they can do it alone. I mean, they can do annotation, you know, they can learn how to do the annotation and so forth, but the entire package of analyzing the materials all the way through to formative assessment is hard to do one teacher by him or herself. I think it's very hard. So I would say that they need to leverage their ed specialists who can either work with them in ones or twos, you know, either work with the individual teacher or work with a group of teachers, that they need to take off small bites. So maybe all they can do this year is analyze the materials. Maybe that's all they can do this year. And maybe, you know, next year they start trying to learn annotation or double entry journaling, whatever. Maybe it has to be a slower process. Maybe this summer coming up, you know, you have some professional development with them where you work with them on, you know, I'm going to have them practicing annotation and double entry journaling tomorrow, but maybe they just work on a small bite of things and then put it with a kind of trajectory of where they get to. That's what I would say. Because I want them to know it exists, but I want them to be a forcing function to try to it really works. I mean, it's sort of, and as I said, it's not rocket science. You just get the kids to read the materials, you know, and by virtue of reading the materials and analyzing the materials, they're better able to discuss them, they have more knowledge about what's in them, they do better on tests.
Well, it seems like they would think this makes sense, because the number one thing you hear is, they can't read,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
It's like, well,
You know, I've seen some of these methods, the annotation, the double entry journal, which is called Cornell Notes. More than
It's very similar. The only thing is that summarization isn't
Right.
at the bottom, but it's very similar.
Right.
Yes.
But where I've seen it is where teachers are using it maybe with a word problem
Mm-hmm.
or with test items, but not necessarily with the text.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen it in the language arts classes,
Yeah.
and maybe used in the way that you were talking about. But in the other content areas, which is science and social studies, and even math, not within the lesson itself, where the students are reading, but only in the assessment.
Yeah.
Where, which tells me is we need to step back and start looking at the text itself.
Mm-hmm.
But that
So
school
that's
is
where we-
actually, they're ready because they have at least
Right.
they understand using the process. Now we just need to help them move into
Right.
doing it during instruction, not like a little, I think they call it like a sponge, and do it actually in the lesson and maybe do some background work where they're talking about inferences and, you know, where does the math teacher see it, where does the reading teacher see it, where does science, social studies, and then all kind of understand how it works that way.
That'd be very powerful.
I have a class of, last semester of pre-service teachers, and these were all math teachers, high school math teachers. And so for 2 class periods, we analyzed the state standards, okay? And they were very surprised what they saw, you know, because I was asking them about the level, what level? If you're graphing something, what level is
Mhm.
that? Or if you're explaining or justifying, what level? And they were very impressed. So we did that for 2 weeks, and the following week I said, bring your curriculum, and let's analyze.
Mm-hmm.
And several were using C-scope. And they said, well, we don't need to analyze it, it's been analyzed. You know, somebody did it, somebody analyzed it, the district paid millions of dollars for it, so we really don't need to analyze it. And I was shocked by that. I said, but it's you have to make it your own, so you have to know what it's in there, you know. And so, very reluctantly, they did it for me just because it was a requirement. But they were very hesitant.
Mhm.
They were like, you know, no, we're going to spend too much time, and we don't even need to, or whatever. They came up with all sorts of excuses. You know.
I've seen that. Why would we do this? It's already there. You know, and what what we would say to them is, but you're the one teaching.
Make it your own.
Yeah.
You know, don't let somebody tell you this is what you're going to do, but look at it and say, okay, I'll do that, but not this, or I'll do it this way and not this way. Because these
Well,
books
that'd
are
be
very
confusing.
scripted.
Yeah.
Well, it was very powerful for teachers when we started saying to them, okay, let's look at the first lesson in this particular chapter, then the second lesson, third lesson, fourth lesson, right? Let's look at the lessons. Now, this one is introducing the entire chapter. What does it do? And so they'd read that and they go, why is that there? This lesson over here is the one that really should be in. And they'd say, but it's you know, and we said, well, change it. No, we can't do that. Yeah, you can. You can. You can change
I had
it.
that same exact reaction in a culturally relevant teaching workshop that we did last year. They kept saying, "But we can't, and we can't deviate." And and I kept explaining, I am positive that you go in and have a conversation with your principal and say, "This is why, and this is what we're going to do." You're not going to get into trouble, but they're somehow convinced that C-scope is.
The material will get covered. It's just that it's not being covered in the same order. You know, it's like the textbook publishers aren't like all powerful. It's not like they don't know this kids. They don't know that classroom. They don't know what that teacher knows about that classroom. And the teacher should have the power to make those decisions. Yeah.
Okay, I was going to point out that a lot of these teachers' concerns, because I have some of those mentees that are also saying, I can't do this, I can't do that, is they're under pressure because of the tremendous amounts of material they have to cover. Plus you throw in all of the district benchmarks, all of the state tests and so on. The time constraints are there, and then the administration doesn't want them to, how would you say, deviate from anything because they're going to fall behind, and the pressure is there. So a lot of teachers are not going to even try to do something different. That's why they throw back, well, this, that, I can't do that, and I can't do this, because the districts are putting pressure on them. And being new teachers, they don't know how to handle, like Maria Elena said, hey, I can do this and get better results and so on. They don't even want to mess with that because they have to go fight that argument with whoever's going to come in third and so on. So they don't want to mess with that because they're already under stress. Number one, brand new teachers, some are having classroom problems, student apathy, or whatever it is. They're not going to put the time for this, and the administrators are not going to let them do that either.
Well, one
so they
thing.
don't want to fight the fight, is what I'm saying, basically.
I think that's a reason to analyze what they have. Because if you're not going to be able to cover, and it's not covered, but teach the material that they give you, then you go through and you analyze what can I teach or what can I put together in order for the students to learn.
Which is the first thing you have them do. Look at
Analyze.
this and choose the ones that will make me, teach the concept of whatever.
And then going back to what Maria Elena said, is if you analyze your materials and you come up with a good plan and then you present it to your lead specialist or whoever's head of that school or who you report to, and you have a plan and you let them know this is what I'm doing, then at least you have a plan or an analysis to support. And so, but we have to be there as mentors to say it can be done. It's okay, and I'll help you.
We'll take a risk. A lot of teachers, especially new teachers, and I tell them, I'm going to teach you this, but I don't expect you to do everything your first year.
Right.
You already have enough on your plate. But keep it in mind that you can try it 2-3 years down the road, and if it fails, that's okay. Tweak it and change it and make it better. But at least you have it. But somebody want to listen. Oh, I have to do this, and
What I often say to teachers at the very beginning is very similar to what you just said, and that is that coverage doesn't mean taught, and so they will say, well, I have to cover this material, and I'll say, well, okay, you can cover the material, but that doesn't mean they learn the material. You need something that makes sure they learn the material. You need tools to make sure they learn. You need formative assessments to really analyze where they are so you don't have to get to the end of the semester and all of a sudden you're going, oh, I thought they knew this.
Yeah, and I tell my students, teachers, if at the end your students did not pass the test, there's no learning, then there was no teaching. You just
Exactly
spent the
right.
whole day talking, but there was no teaching. If there's no learning, there's no teaching. And they're like, but we taught. Well,
No.
no, you talked.
You talked. Exactly right.
And they were hearing you, but they were not listening. You know, and so it's this constant fight with them. You know, that you can teach all day, but if nothing's being learned, then there's no teaching.
That's exactly right.
And then, you're right, in the first year, they're just learning.
Yeah, and
I mean,
I
they're
get
just
They
that.
don't want
learning.
to challenge or step out of the box.
And I
And
don't
they're
blame
just
them.
learning,
I don't blame them.
but we're there, and that's what I like about the mentor literacy teacher being there, and that's where we come in
Right.
as our program, saying that, that's why we're there for the first 3 years with our teachers, to support them. And so, many times the first year, we just work on class management and survival skills. But the second and third year, we can work on making sure they learn this little process. Or processes that they've gotten in the schools, because they might have some good ones too. But really, hone in on what they're supposed to be doing in the classroom.
And if they at least hear us telling them that this is important, they don't wanna go take on, the leadership. But at least they know that it's real, and that as the more they analyze and the braver they get, that one day they may be able to go ahead and speak up about it, and maybe rally some people around them and create a team that's willing to do something like that.
Well, many of these teachers, depending on how large the school is, even at the 6th and 7th grade level, they do have maybe 1 or 2 other people who are teaching that subject, because you have this classroom, and just working together on, as I said, spending the year just analyzing the curriculum would put them in better shape than they are right now, and then maybe the next year try to work on a tool or routine, and with the goal of getting there, as opposed to, I've got to go out tomorrow and do an annotation, or I got to go out tomorrow and do. Well, you can do that, but without the rest of it, then it's no better than doing a KWL just because you just learned how to do one in professional development meeting.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, this is wonderful material, and I'm thinking here, okay, they're gonna tell me they've already been analyzed, and okay, so if that has happened, and would it be very difficult for them to start with the annotation, remembering that our science state test is a reading test.
Okay.
So giving the kids these tools for them to use and practice in the classroom, because obviously Cisco's going to say, read this part of the text or something. But having the kids learn those tools, would that be helpful?
Yes, it would be
It
helpful.
would be helpful, and it's not going to mess up the process of
Well,
having to analyze first and so on and so forth?
From the kids' standpoint, having the tool is fine. What we learned was that the kids would learn this in science class, and then they'd go to their English classrooms or social studies classrooms, and they'd say, "Can I annotate?" And the teachers were like, "What? What's annotation?" And then they'd ask each other in the lounge or whatever, and they'd say, "Oh, we're doing annotation in here." Okay, yeah, and so the students would annotate, and the students would teach their younger siblings to annotate, because for the first time they had something that they could do to the text. So no, it's not going to hurt the kids. I mean, the kids can go right forward and doing the annotation and double entry journaling. It's really about the larger classroom pedagogy that the teachers would need to work on. But giving the kids something right away is fine. It's just that without the larger structures, the teacher will likely fall back to something else, because the learning, the learning hasn't happened in broad strokes. But it's like giving the kids an immunization, right? Giving them something so that they have something to hang their ideas on, something that they can do to the text, is certainly a worthwhile thing to do. And we've had people do that.
Our teachers coming in tomorrow and, they say, okay, well, I can't do that, I'm not allowed to do that, and this is so, but them taking that part of the annotation.
Mhm.
And we've taught our APE people that, to a professional development, let's try and bring something back
Mhm.
and implement it. It's like, it will probably be that something that they bring back,
I could see that because it's definitely the most tangible.
tangible,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Can you describe a little bit for us, some of the things that you're gonna do with the teachers in the afternoon portion?
Mhm.
That way they'll have an idea of how they can
Yes.
work with some of this.
So tomorrow morning, my plan is, without the part about the research at the school, well, I'm going to end just before that. But I'll talk for the first, 40 minutes or so. And then I'm going to ask the teachers to read an article on nanotechnology. And they're going to read this article, and I'm going to ask them to read it and, make any notes or anything they have in the margins or whatever about the article. Then I'm going to ask them, so what'd that feel like? What was it like to read about nanotechnology? Is it a cool new thing? Did you really understand all of it? What did you like? What did you not like? And we're going to talk about the difficulty of reading a nanotechnology article when you're not a nanotechnologist. And then I'm going to talk about how for the vast majority of students with low literacy skills, students who are non-English background learners, and students who are impoverished, this is what it feels like every single day. You go from math class to science class to English class to social studies class, and someone gives you some text that you don't know how to read and that you are trying to figure out how to make sense of. And it's because we're all so well educated, we don't usually encounter that kind of text. We don't have to deal with that kind of text anymore. We know how to deal with it, and stuff we don't want to deal with, we just sort of put to the side. But kids are forced by law to go and have to sit and read this stuff every single day that they don't understand and that they don't know, they don't have good tools and strategies for using. So after we do that, then I'm going to ask them to get into groups, and they're going to start doing an annotation. They're going to annotate, and then they're going to do a double entry journal, and then so they're going to do annotations and start double entry journalism in the morning. Then I think there's lunch, and then they'll do double entry journaling some more, and then they'll do, then after that they will do summary writing, and then at the end of the day we're going to talk about what those experiences are with in between talking about the experiences, as I want them to really have a hands-on experience of doing that work. So that's it. In groups. Yeah, they'll do it in groups, and yeah, that's the plan. So.
Dr. Gomez, thank you very much. I think I learned some things today, and I'm looking forward for tomorrow.
Thank you.
And
Thank you very much.